This recording is protected by copyright. No part may be reproduced without the prior permission of the University of South Australia.
So our first presenter is Mr. Ken Berryman. He's from the National Film and Sound Archive, and he's going to tell us a little bit about a project that looks at the early days of television and the golden age of radio. Ken Berryman manages the oral history program, and Helen Tully manages the television unit for the National Film and Sound Archive. They are both based in the NFSA Melbourne office. And the last bit of information is that we'll be saving our questions until the end. So please do write down any questions you may have for Ken. Thank you.
Can I start with an apology too? It's a solo act this morning. This is an early indication of the new government's public service austerity cuts. So if any of you are expecting to see Helen Tully and want to go to another session now, I won't be at all offended if you want to make a quick exit. So, but I'll struggle on as best I can and hope that you'll be interested in our presentation. At the launch of the Once Upon a Wireless Oral History Project in Sydney in May 1999, the organising committee chairman and ex-Sydney broadcaster Leon Becker described the project thus. I can't use Leon's voice, I'm sorry, I'm a shocking mimic. Our plan is to record on long life audio tape a comprehensive oral history of commercial radio in Australia from its earliest days in 1924 right through to present time. We believe that textbooks just cannot adequately tell the story. A radio history cries out for the voice, the colour, the life of personal anecdotes, and the reason for the urgency of this project will be obvious. Each day that passes we lose somebody from our beloved industry. Somebody's voice cannot be heard and will never be heard telling the personal stories that he or she can only tell. We want to record the broadcasters, the administrators, the program makers and builders, the actors, the actresses, all who have contributed so much. We see something over 1,000 hours of invaluable oral history resulting from this Round Australia quest. Leon Becker in 1991. Once Upon a Wireless is the largest single oral history project with which the National Film and Sound Archive has been associated. Conceived originally by retired Sydney radio man Bruce Asmus in consultation with other veteran broadcasters in the late 1980s. They had become increasingly alarmed by the apparent loss of destruction of large amounts of recorded radio material. But their more pressing concern was that the memories and stories of those who had been involved in radio broadcasting since its earliest days were equally at risk, and from this, the project concept, initially called an archive of, or an audio history of, commercial broadcasting in Australia, was born. At this point it was envisaged as a 3-year project which would yield around 500 interviews and more than 1,000 hours of recording with radio pioneers, or those who had worked with them, at a cost of $1.5 million, to be sourced from a mix of government and corporate funding. But kickstarting a project of this magnitude was easier said than done. It was only when consultant Brendan Horgan was brought in to manage the project and a Sydney-based steering committee comprising radio personalities, technical and management staff past and present put in place that things began to gather impetus. The May 1991 launch was a great success, attracting lots of media coverage and goodwill, but no dollars. Ultimately, Horgan set up a public company with the ability to give a tax deduction, and over time some high-profile sponsors including BASF, Qantas, FARB, which is the Federation of Radio Broadcasters, Westpac and Wesco provided some welcome support. Under the new guise, Horgan became project director and company secretary, and Bruce Leonard chairman of the board of directors. For its part, while expressing enthusiasm for the project from day one, the NFSA was meant to be an arm's length partner in that it could not directly commit money or staff to the project. In the event though, the archive did provide some cash contributions to the project at different times, had staff involved in various capacities in each of its offices, hosted committee meetings and handover ceremonies in Sydney and Melbourne, and took in the completed interviews for lodgement in the National Collection. With this level of support in Sydney, Melbourne and Canberra, and related assistance from state libraries elsewhere, including the SLSA here, the Once Upon a Wireless company was able to set up working committees of committed veterans from commercial radio who shared the project aims, initially in Sydney, then Melbourne, and progressively through the other states. Based on their contacts and knowledge of the industry, these volunteer groups took responsibility for selecting who to interview, tracking down their subjects and conducting the actual interviews. Their targets were those people still living who had worked extensively in all areas of Australian commercial radio, from its inception through the so-called golden years until the introduction of television in the mid to late 1950s. The first official handover of completed interview tapes to the NFSA was made in August 1995, and those ceremonies continued periodically until the project's conclusion in late 1996. The Adelaide-based team of interviewers included Bill Moody, Nancy Flannery, Rick Palmer, Alec McCaskill, Vaughan Harvey and Bryce Radford. Their interviews were among the last to be recorded for this project, mostly in 1996. Among those interviewed for the South Australian component of the project were 5KA and ABC announcer, presenter, newsreader Bob Moore, freelance interviewer Stella Guthrie, sports and racing broadcasters Bert Day and Johnny O'Neill, jazz program presenter Kim Bonathan, actresses Dulcie Davenport and Marjorie Irving, and program hosts Doreen Govett and Lionel Williams. Across the 6 states, the interviews themselves, as might be expected, vary enormously in terms of scope and quality. Each interview was of a different length, with no prescribed set of questions, and each interviewer had discretion over the approach to be taken in each instance. Collectively, the interviews cover a wide range of topics, and if the technology works, I'll play you a few samples of some of the enjoyable and enlightening moments from the Once Upon a Wireless body of work. The first clip features Dan Webb, or Danny as he was better known then, ex-3DB in Melbourne, reminding us all that radio truly was the theatre of the mind.
Can I tell you a funny story? This is about how people people listening to radio form an opinion of what you look like. I mean, your listeners have a view. They think Bob Horsfall is this, that, or the other. You know.
I think he's handsome when
Yeah.
they see me. Yeah.
You'd remember the minstrel show? The
Oh,
CMG
yes,
minstrel.
yes,
Okay.
yes.
Eric Pearce used to go through introducing everybody, and now tall, fair, and debonair brother Sunshine, and that was Dick Cranbourne, tall, fair, and debonair. Well, as you know, Dick was about 5 foot high, and the three of us were up in Warwicknabeal for a radio hospital appeal, and we just got out of the car. We're walking down to the pub with Merv Sleep, the engineer, and a woman came up and she said, "Oh, you must be the boys from 3DB." And we said, Eric Pearce said, "Yes, madam, we are. Allow me to introduce ourselves." Eric, now I'm Eric Pearce, and this is Dick Cranbourne. And before he could go any further, she said, rubbish." He said, "Excuse me." He said, "This is Dick Cranbourne." She said, "Rubbish." And Eric said, "What's the matter with you?" And she said, "Dick Cranbourne's brother Sunshine. He's tall, fair, and debonair. This little bugger's just a little runt."
Many stories typically fell under the "what can go wrong" heading, and often derived from minimally staffed regional station scenarios. In this next clip, Denzel Housen, from his time at 3YB in Warrnambool, recounts what can go wrong in the studio if the panel operator happened to select the wrong track from a radio transcription disc.
There's a lovely story about John Ball, which I was very obliquely concerned with. They were doing an episode of Lavender Grove, and he used to do the opening announcement, didn't he?
Yes.
Lavender Grove, the story of an everyday family, yes. And on this particular occasion, he'd said something like, "Lavender Grove, oh, bugger it." And what they did, they lifted, this was being recorded at Broadcast Exchange, they lifted the cutting head across a quarter of an inch and started again, and scribed out the first track. I was working at 3YB Warrnambool at the time when this particular episode turned up, and I wasn't on air this particular night. It was another fellow who was doing night duty at the time put this on, and immediately left the studio, shut the studio door, and went out to file some records in the record library. And inside the disc is churning round and round. He'd started it on the outside track instead of the proper track. And it's going, lavender grow, oh, bugger it, click. Oh, bugger it, click. Oh, bugger it, click. Oh, bugger it. Went on for about 3 minutes because the lad wasn't in the studio. The engineer was out fixing his car or something down at the transmitter. And the way they eventually got it off the air, one of the PMG blokes was home and he guessed what had happened, and he went to phoned the exchange and said, for God's sake, pull YB's broadcast line out to get them off the air. That's a true story.
The next extract features another Melbourne broadcaster, Keith Glover, on the subject of voice training for announcers. A neat example, if we needed one, of how verbally adroit these on-air presenters of radio's golden age were.
And I'll tell you one final thing. Happy Hammond, who spent his life, of course, in commercial radio after we parted after the war in our stage work, he and another chap in Newcastle named Jimmy Sanderson worked out a good way of getting the mouth working very well of a morning. They used to tell the story of a chap who was married in wartime, and like wartime experiences, he only had about 3 or 4 days for a honeymoon, so he borrowed his father-in-law's car, and they went out into Western Victoria. I won't tell you the name of the town. Someone listening to this might come from there. But the only place they could see where they could stay the night was called the Inside Inn. So the chap got out of the car, went inside the Inside Inn, and said to the girl sitting just inside the Inside Inn, he said, "Excuse me, is the manager of the Inside Inn inside the Inside Inn?" And the girl looked at him rather sadly. She said, "Sir, I'm very sorry to have to tell you that the manager of the Inside Inn is not inside the Inside Inn at present. As a matter of fact, he's just eaten something that disagreed with him. He's outside the Inside Inn, leaning up against the wall of the Inside Inn, trying to keep his inside in." And we used to say, Denzel, that if you could say that twice without a mistake before 6 a.m, you could read anything during the day.
Yes. Keith Glover, thanks very, very much for talking to us.
Now, 2 more anecdotes from the What Can Go Wrong department, which is just a source of so much joy, in relation to radio drama. The first from the Once Upon a Wireless interview with actor Lloyd Lamble.
And so we were working back until about 10 o'clock at night, and we were dog-tired, you know, and we decided to fly the last episode without rehearsal. We were all pretty good readers, of course, in those days. And dear old Frank Bradley had a line and a direction afterward, which hadn't been bracketed.
Oh dear.
And he uttered the line, "By God, I'll kill you, phone rings." And we left him, you know, we couldn't record it again.
Isn't that beautiful?
In similar vein, this is actress Lynn Murphy talking about George Edwards and the cast recording of an episode of the long-running Dad and Dave serial.
And there were wonderful stories about George. George, when he was doing Dad and Dave, there's a sort of marvellous story. I don't know if it's true, but it sounds like it. He and Mother were driving up to their home. They'd been into the city, and they were saying, really looking forward to going home. And it got a bit of a stretch, you know, that it was going a bit slowly. So anyhow, not having seen the scripts before, somehow they were written at the last moment, a lot of this, and just sort of handed to them. So they were saying, "Oh, isn't it lovely, Dad? Look, there's our house. Look at the old home. Oh, look, hasn't the grass grown? Isn't it? Oh, isn't it wonderful to be home? Now, here we go up the drive," and they turn over the page. "Oh, Dad, look, it's on fire! Oh!"
Finally, the very voluble Michael Pate, discussing the advent of technological change and its implications for the radio performer fraternity.
And Paul Jacklin said, "Michael, stop walking around like that, will you please? Don't feel too bad. Why don't you come in here for a minute, please?" And I said, "All right." And I thought, oh boy, is he going to cane me, right? He's being too nice. And Paul was a wonderful person, but he had a bit of a reputation for giving you a serve, you know, a bit of stick. And so I go in and he said, "Have a look at this." I said, "Yes, what is it?" He said, It is called a tape recorder. I said, a tape recorder? I've heard of those. Is this what you're recording on? He said, yes, dear boy. He said, we'll just go back, pick it up at the music. And he said, you go on. Now you go inside, pump yourself up again, and we're ready to go. And I went inside again, and I thought, oh, all that wonderful stuff. And it was just into the beginning of the next scene that I'd blown. So I went in, and he said, you're ready to go? And I said, yes, let her rip. And boom, and I'm into it again. And it's all beautifully done, and it's all melded and mixed, and oh God, that was like being reprieved from death row, you know. I mean, it was just gigantic to have the freedom that you knew that you could. Look, it was almost like saying, oh, wait there, we'll just run the tape back, or we'll do this, or just go on and we'll nick it together.
And that was as early as the late 40s?
No, that was 1950. That was 1950 that I experienced that with Paul Jackson, to the best of my knowledge. I think it was doing the Motorola shows of that year, because I know my wife of that time went in and picked up what prize I had won for acting or writing, I forget what it was that I won, in the Motorola while I was first in America. So it would have been 1950, I think, then, at 2UE. And probably all the other units were going to that at that time. When shows were done live, back in the late 30s, or from the time that I started to experience it, there was a tremendous tense sort of, yes, a tension, sort of you were really poised to go. And I mean, it created such a wonderful sort of energy in us that I think that's where the finest performances came from. And same thing after the war, for those years before tape came in. And I think after that, many of the actors, well, many is too big a word probably, but certainly some of the actors said, oh, well, it doesn't matter if we blow. It doesn't matter, we can just go back and pick it up. And I noticed actors that I'd worked with from that period when they were younger actors, and that I later worked with, well, say when I was doing Power Without Glory, the TV series with the ABC, and I met a number of them that had been radio actors with me. God, their work was sloppy. Really sloppy. I mean, they were satisfied with work that they did which wouldn't have got them an audition when they were beginning as radio actors. And Paul Jackson said...
So what were the project outcomes overall? For the Once Upon a Wireless Committee and Company, it fell short of its ambitious original interview and sponsorship targets, but it did succeed in capturing on tape for posterity the essence of an era of commercial radio broadcasting in Australia. Given also its representation in each state and the nomadic nature of many of the radio practitioners interviewed, the project achieved genuine national reach. In addition, it became obvious to the Once Upon a Wireless team, as they went about the task of gathering interviews with radio pioneers, that many of these people had also been television pioneers. Of the South Australian interviewees noted earlier, for example, Govett, Williams and Moore all gravitated to on-air roles on commercial or ABC television in Adelaide. How could it have been otherwise? Television was a new and unknown medium, an industry in Australia in the late 1950s. The talent and the technicians had to come from somewhere, and radio programming as we knew it then would never been the same again, competing with the new kid on the block. The many interview references to the birth of television in this country also brought home to Once Upon a Wireless project director Brendan Horgan the sobering truth that those involved in this new field at that crossover time in the mid-90s were by now similarly aged challenged. This inspired him to embark upon a new interview-based project, again with support from the NFSA and from the then Federation of Australian Commercial Television, better known as FACTS, entitled Radio with Pictures. Horgan decided to begin the new project with an interview with then TCN9 identity and the first face on Australian television, Bruce Gyngell, in August 1998. Gyngell's subsequent illness that led to his death brought home to Horgan the urgent nature of this new project. But this was a single-person quest, unlike the volunteer team-based project which preceded it. Nonetheless, Horgan was, over the next several years, able to arrange film interviews with 100 Australians from all walks of television life, as he called it. who made a significant contribution to television broadcasting in each state between 1955 and 1970. These interviews now form part of the television oral history collection at the NFSA and are available for viewing, and were Helen Tully here this morning, you would have seen some excerpts from those as well, so I apologise for that. This project also yielded a publication of the same name, Radio with Pictures, based in large part on the information, stories and anecdotes from the Radio with Pictures interviews. But returning to the earlier project, how do we rate its results 20 years on from the handover of the first set of completed interviews? For the NFSA, Once Upon a Wireless provided a significant boost to its under-resourced oral history program. Some collection balance with radio underrepresented in terms of interview holdings prior to this, and some welcome critical mass to the overall oral history collection. The project also gave relevant staff in each of the NFSA offices the opportunity to better intersect with this important group of stakeholders, especially at the various handover ceremonies which the archive hosted. In terms of the overall legacy of Once Upon a Wireless, at one level, it provided a very workable model for producing a win-win outcome from an archive and from a media industry partnership. The Once Upon a Wireless company largely fulfilled its aim of chronicling the history of commercial radio via the recorded words and anecdotes of those who steered it through its halcyon days prior to television. This outcome was achieved through the extensive personal networking of the small and skilled army of volunteers, the well-organised effort of the Once Upon a Wireless project director and board, and its corporate status, which helped secure valuable sponsorships at critical times. There is no way the archive with its limited resources could have commissioned, recorded and acquired a body of work of this magnitude on its own, and no doubt that the window of opportunity to interview many of these radio luminaries would have closed very quickly had not this project been initiated at that time. At the same time, the NFSA did provide a permanent home for the completed interviews, as well as various levels of support and assistance for the project as indicated throughout its 7-year duration. And this duty of care continues. The original interviews were recorded on audio cassette with some equipment and tapes made available by the archive and subsequently transferred to Studio Master 911 reel-to-reel tape supplied by BASF, predominantly by volunteers in Melbourne and Sydney, before handover to the NFSA. In all, around 360 interviews under Once Upon a Wireless auspices were ultimately lodged with the archive for accessioning and preservation. In turn, the archive has in recent years been progressively digitising this collection, and more than 250 Once Upon a Wireless interviews have now been fully digitised, increasing their accessibility for scholars, researchers, program makers and for online use. This digital preservation work will continue until the entire project output is completed. The original interviews were conducted by around 40 volunteer interviewers across the 6 states. For the most part, these people were not professional or trained oral historians, and the quality of interview varies considerably. The best of them, though, are equal to any of those recorded by career interviewers on commission for the regular oral history program. And, like the best interview content, they highlight the value of the personal anecdote, as already noted, in adding life and colour to the historical record, and help contextualise the actual productions of the time, many of which are also held as part of the NFSA's collection of radio programs on the sort of radio transcription discs that Denzelhausen mentions. Given also that many of the Once Upon a Wireless interviews were recorded with on-air talent, the common element and extra dimension that these presenters or performers bring to their interviews is the voice. The voice. Their articulation and ongoing love affair with the microphone so redolent of the golden radio age. Above all, the Once Upon a Wireless project drew to national attention the urgency of the need to capture the story of this particular era in Australian broadcast history before it disappeared. Given that the Young Turks who led the music, talkback and current affairs programming charge after television threatened to kill the radio star are now not so young, perhaps the time for a Mark II version of Once Upon a Wireless is nigh as well. Then there's the whole FM revolution and the still largely unrecorded story of the development of community radio in Australia, and the stories of regional television pre-aggregation when local content actually meant just that. Safe to say that oral historians working in the area of Australian media are going to be busy for a while yet. Thank you.